All right, let's dive right in. Today, we're asking a pretty massive question. Is the American empire, is it in decline? To try and answer that, we're going to put the United States to the test and compare it against the ghosts of fallen empires from the past. Let's get started. You hear this question everywhere, right? Is the era of American dominance actually coming to an end? Are we watching the slow motion decline of a global superpower? Well, to get to the truth, we really have to look at the data and, more importantly, the patterns of history. And this is the central idea for our whole investigation today. History is basically a graveyard of empires that were absolutely convinced they were invincible. The moment a superpower thinks it can't fall, that's often the very first sign that it's in trouble. So, to understand where America might be headed, we have to listen to the echoes of the past. The rise and fall of great powers, it's not random. It tends to follow very specific patterns. And if we study those patterns, we can get a much clearer picture of what's happening right now. Okay, so the first thing to get straight is that collapse isn't some big dramatic event like you see in the movies. It's a process. It's a long, grinding decline that's fueled by this whole web of interconnected problems. So think of it less like a sudden explosion and more like a slow, steady erosion over time. So here's our game plan. We're going to build a kind of blueprint for collapse. We'll look at the symptoms that showed up in past superpowers right before they fell, and then we'll use that blueprint as a lens to see if those exact same symptoms are popping up in the United States today. And you can see the common threads right here. Spain? They debased their currency and went bankrupt 4 times. The British Empire? It drowned in war debt. We're talking $1 trillion in today's money. And the Soviets? They literally spent themselves into oblivion on their military. The patterns are crystal clear. Mismanaged money, huge debt, and military overreach. Okay, now for the main event. We're going to take that historical blueprint and lay it right over the United States. We'll use a 7-stage framework of decline to see just how many of these classic warning signs are actually present today. So this is our checklist. We're going to go through these one by one, looking for evidence. First up, military overextension, then the value of our money, the national debt, our ability to actually make things, social cohesion, and finally, the global status of the US dollar. Stage 1, military overextension. Just look at this number. It's staggering. Roughly 800 US military bases spread across more than 80 countries. That is a global footprint that is completely unmatched in history. And yeah, it comes with a massive price tag, over $1 trillion for the 2026 budget request alone. But here's where the comparison gets a little tricky. See, unlike Spain, which had to fight its wars all by itself, the US has alliances like NATO to share the cost and the burden. And while the budget is enormous, it's about 3.2% of GDP. That's just a fraction of the 15 to 20% the Soviets were spending right before they collapsed. So yeah, there are parallels, but there are also some really key differences. All right, now for stage 2, currency debasement. Ever since the US ditched the gold standard back in 1971, the dollar has lost about 87% of its value. Think about it this way. What a single dollar could buy you back then, you'd need almost $8 for today. That's a slow, steady theft of wealth from anyone holding the currency. And that leads us right into stage 3, the debt spiral. $38 trillion. It's a number so huge it's almost meaningless. It's now about the same size as the entire US economy. The interest payments alone cost over $1 trillion a year. That's just the interest. Now, stages 4 and 5, loss of production and social decay, they often go hand in hand. As we've seen manufacturing jobs disappear, we're also seeing signs of deep social stress. Things like a big jump in homelessness, a totally devastating opioid crisis, and a birth rate that's fallen way below what's needed to sustain the population. These are classic symptoms of an empire that's straining from the inside out. So far, the picture looks pretty grim, I'll admit, but that's only half the story. The prosecution has rested its case. Now it's time for the defense. Because the United States has some very unique strengths that make those old historical comparisons, incomplete. Let's look at the case for American resilience. Because despite all those warning signs we just talked about, the US dollar is still king. Look at this chart. 58% of all the money held in reserve by central banks around the world is in US dollars. The euro is a very distant second. As long as the world needs dollars to do business, the US holds a massive economic advantage. And here's another thing. Unlike the rigid, top-down empires of the past, the US has shown this incredible ability to adapt and reform. Just think about the 2008 financial crisis. That was a near-total meltdown, but the system bent without breaking, and it eventually bounced back. That kind of flexibility is a core strength you don't see in fallen empires. And honestly, the signs of strains are all around us. The US leads the world in game-changing tech like AI. Immigration helps keep the population growing, which is something a lot of other developed countries really struggle with. We're even seeing positive trends in crime rates and the trade deficit, all while the economy keeps chugging along with healthy 2.5 to 3% growth. So, where does that leave us? What is the final verdict? We've seen some pretty compelling evidence for decline, but also some powerful arguments for resilience. Where does our investigation land on the collapse of the American empire?
Well, the consensus seems to be this. We're not heading for some dramatic Roman-style collapse. The biggest risk isn't an overnight implosion. It's more of a slow, relative decline, a gradual shift from a world with one superpower to a world with several competing powers.
In fact, most serious analysts believe that American power will stick around for decades, maybe to 2050 or even longer. And this suggests that decline isn't some inevitable fate sealed by history. It's a choice. The biggest threats are internal. They're the policy decisions being made or not made right now. Which leaves us with one last, really crucial question. Is America's destiny locked into the same historical cycle that's claimed every single empire before it? Or is the future still unwritten, resting entirely on the choices that we make today? The answer to that question is going to define the 21st century.